96.3 FM, The Source.
It's going to be fun. 6 minutes after 9 o'clock, it is time for Jim George, the professor of the universe. You know, he started out talking about cable TV, and then we went on to gadgets of all kinds and apps, and then it occurred to us that he pretty much knows everything. So he is the professor of the universe. Not only does he know everything, he knows everyone, including George Albright, who's also in the studio, who is the guy we pay when we want to get our licenses for our cars and things like that. But I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. Good morning, Jim, and good morning, George.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How you guys doing?
Fabulous.
Good.
You know, George Albright, I loved the video where the people who found the ring that belonged to one of the Barker brothers?
Fred Barker, Ma Barker's son.
When they gave that to you.
Yes.
That was a great video. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that.
That made me cry.
Yeah. And this belonged to the guy who was shot eventually by the FBI, right?
Well, Ma Barker had 4 sons, and in November of 1934, she and her son Fred rented the Carson Bradford house.
Oh, that was a rental.
Oh yeah, it was a rental. Well, I'll come back and we'll do a whole story on that. And just real quick, Carson Good, who's my dear friend I grew up with, his great grandfather was Carson Bradford, who built the house. A realtor from Ocala contacted them. They lived in Miami, and said, I got somebody who wants to pay quite a bit of money to rent your house. And he asked his wife, Carson's great-great-grandmother, and she said, no, we're not doing that. And he went ahead and rented it anyway and didn't tell her. So she opens up the newspaper 6 weeks later on January 17th, 1935, and sees her house has been shot with 2,000 rounds by 15 FBI agents. So it was a little quiet in the Carson Bradford house that in Miami.
Oh, my gosh. What was your relation? Was it your uncle that was there?
My grandfather was 28 years old, and he lived in Wearsdale and heard about the gun battle at the Wearsdale post office. He drove down there, was one of the rubberneckers that saw the gun battle, and the Barkers sprayed machine gun bullets in his direction, so he jumped behind a tree, split his pants, walked down to the hardware store, bought another pair of pants because he was a real gentleman, and came back and watched the rest of the carnage. So that story has always been in my family. So then my dad goes to the University of Florida in 1950, and he meets Carson Bradford's granddaughter, Betty, who had married Morton Good. So it was Betty and Morton Good. They both went to law school, but they grew up with Dad as friends. So we were friends with them. Then you fast forward another 15 years. Dad bought the house right next door in 1966 or 7 as our lake house, and I became the caretaker when I was 15 years old.
Oh, really?
Mowed it and watched out. So about 5 years ago, the house was for sale. Nothing was happening, and I just got up one day and said, I'm in a position of influence to save this house, and I'm going to, by God, I'm going to save the house. And it took us 5 years, but we saved the house.
You saved the house. Now, I'm just curious because the reason we were talking about you last week because you were in the paper for the Hops tour, and the newspaper showed this marvelous picture of the Gulf station in your backyard, and I want to talk about that.
Okay.
And Jim said he knew you. You were personal friends. How do you guys know each other?
Oh, it goes back a ways. But one thing about George that I'll say, and then I'll let you ask it and tell him all the questions. We call each other friends, but definition of friends is someone you spend time with and everything.
Right.
But George is the type of guy who shows himself friendly. Everybody he meets, he's a friend to.
Absolutely,
and he never forgets you. I guarantee you, he never forgets you.
That's my experience
and
too.
So, he's the kind of guy you can call up, and if you need something, he's there for you. So I said, when you said that you wanted to talk about him, I said, I'll just call up George.
Oh, nice.
And believe me, the second ring, he answered, "Hey, Jim, how you doing?" So, and I probably hadn't talked to him in a year.
Wow. And not to just kiss your butt or whatever, but it's absolutely true. Whenever we've met you, you are just the friendliest guy. The one story I tell a lot, though, is when Robin and I were raising money for the Literacy Council, we were playing accordion and mandolin. You let us play in your lobby.
Yes.
And I thought it sounded so
was
good in
great.
there.
It has nice acoustics. in there.
Acoustics.
It was
They're
like
great.
singing in the shower. And then you came in and gave us a check for the Literacy Council,
Oh,
which
sure.
was outstanding. So thank you for that.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Absolutely.
All right, so getting back to your interest in old stuff, antiques.
Yes.
Did it start because of that, when being a caretaker of a historic house?
No, all four of my grandparents loved history, and they loved collecting antiques.
Really?
My grandparents on my mom's side, that were both teachers, would go in the 60s. They were retired, and they'd go to Webster every Monday to the flea market.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And now it's all a bunch of junk, but truthfully, in the early 60s,
That was a whole bunch of junk.
well, it's like everything's made in China. It's
Yeah.
being sold there. Rope, underwear, whatever you want.
Oh, that must
Some
hurt.
no,
Bamboo
some no.
pillows.
Rope underwear.
No rope and underwear.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I was going to get
Rope
some.
underwear.
No.
That's him.
But in the that is him. And, but in the 60s,
Light up.
it was all antiques. And you got to realize too, and I've got a bunch of their stuff, and they're very proud of it, because before the internet, unless you saw something in a publication or you ran into it in person, there was no way to collect widgets, whatever it was. And now it's no big deal. You go to eBay, type in what you want,
Yeah.
and you can build a collection overnight. But that's not how it was. So all four of them had a profound interest in history. I enjoyed the history on all four of my grandparents behind them, and I just love history, and it is so true. In order for you to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. And if you don't think history repeats itself, you're a fool.
That's right.
Exactly.
There you go. Has the Barker House been converted into a museum?
Well, let me finish about the ring, because you brought the ring up. So I had right before the owners of the Barker property deeded the land to Kirk Boone and Albert Peake that bought the land, but we kept the house. We had metal detectors come on. They contacted us out of the blue, out of Orlando. And unbeknown to me, the president of the club, who's one of the best detectors in the world, found a gold ring that afternoon that had FGB on it. And they got in the car and they said, well, Fred Barker, that's kind of weird. And so they Googled his name, and his middle name was George.
Wow.
Really?
So I went down and gave a speech on Ma Barker a month later in Orlando, and they presented me with the ring, and you can go on and see it on eBay. Just type,
Yes,
I don't mean
yes.
eBay, on YouTube. Just type in Fred Barker ring. But and the ring belongs to the people of Marion. In fact, I called Carson. He was in New York, the former owner of the house. And I said, Carson, I've got your ring, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, George, that ring doesn't belong to me. It belongs to people of Marion County.
Oh, nice.
So I have the ring, and I've got over 50 shell casings that the FBI shot at the Barkers from behind the trees. And then we've got a half a dozen bullets that we found in the sand with metal detectors that the Barkers shot at the FBI. So all that is going to go into the museum, and the house has been moved to County Park. We just this week got our letter from the FBI of our nonprofit status.
Oh, okay.
We have we have not set the website up, but it's going to be www.mabarkerhouse.org.
Was she, one question about her, was she in on the bad things that the boys were doing, or was she just protecting them and knowing that they did bad things? It's almost the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. There's a lot of issue about that through the years. But two things. One is, and I'm pretty certain I'm correct, she was the first woman ever shot or killed by the FBI.
Really?
And that afternoon, Hoover was in Washington monitoring the whole thing. J. Edgar Hoover put out a scathing press release about how dangerous she and Fred were, and they were multiple murder people. But if you read it and you look at the thing, it was just a little bit too much theater. And what he was doing was he was worried that he was trying to inoculate the FBI from getting some really bad press of gunning down a woman with 15 machine guns,
Yeah.
So, but I will tell you this. I've had the FBI in the house now 3 times, and twice they came from Jacksonville, then several times from the local office. One of the agents, being an FBI agent, pointed out that there's pictures in the house the day the Barkers were killed. They took pictures of every room after they were dead.
Yeah.
If you look at the table the dining room table that's still with the house. There's a big set of blueprints laying on the table. So Fred, and
Really?
if Ma was there, so just Fred and Ma were sitting there casing some building
Oh, okay.
because
Wow.
and it probably was a bank or something substantial
Oh, wow.
for them to. And where would they get the blueprints from?
Yeah. So,
Exactly.
Fascinating.
yeah, not on eBay.
Inside job.
No,
yeah.
not anybody. So, well, and I never thought about it. It had to be an inside job. How else would they have gotten the plans?
Yeah.
And it's a big roll. It's not like one thing. You can.
But we don't know what the blueprints are to?
No.
That's interesting.
So maybe the FBI confiscated them.
Oh, they
then.
did. They did. They've got everything. And I've worked with the FBI. In fact, they invited me to Washington. I went to headquarters and toured and met with a historian. And they've got some stuff. They've let the guns that they confiscated that day get scattered. Typical federal government, they don't know where everything. They don't know where it is. They know where some of it is, but
Oh, wow. Really?
well, things
That's kind of
happen.
interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Gulf station in your backyard. What's that story?
Well, there's a story like everything else. Every storyteller has a story. Growing up in Wearsdale, right in the
That's a good
center.
title for your book.
That is,
Every
what? I like it.
storyteller has
That's
a story.
I might do
That's
that.
a good thing for your book.
I've thought about writing a book about the cars that I've owned and through the years because a lot of them have got some really interesting background.
Is that your car in the same picture?
Yes, yeah, that's an interesting thing too. I'll tell you about that. But growing up in Wearsdale, right there at the corner of C42 and C25, there used to be a Gulf station.
Ah, I know exactly what you mean.
And in fact, it only got bulldozed about 5 years ago, and I didn't realize it was being knocked down until it was knocked down. But I looked at it about 15, 20 years ago of picking it up and moving it actually to Lake Weir intact. Because I always wanted my own gas station, and I wanted that one, and it was actually.
Did
really
you ever
small.
work at a gas station when you were a kid?
No, but I interesting. I've been in that gas station my entire life, and one night I slept on the floor of that gas station because we thought we were going to have to light the Grove heaters.
Oh, okay.
In the,
Right,
in
right,
the 60s,
Yeah.
and because it was so darn cold outside.
Yeah.
And so they brought together a crew, and we slept there on the floor. And they were watching, obviously, every half hour the temperature, and if it got below a certain thing, then they turned the crew loose to go out to the orange groves to light the kerosene heaters.
Okay.
So anyway, but then I decided to build my backyard, not a replica of it, but a tribute to it, but something that looked just like a 1940 gas station. Not 30s that was totally Art Deco, not pre-late 40s that became more cookie cutter, but that kind of colonial difference.
It's
in
a
between.
really nice looking building.
Well, thank you. Myself and two people designed it. We used hardy board to make it look like real soft, rough cut
It
wood.
looks really wonderful. Is the stuff inside usable? What do we see? A kitchen in the inside?
Oh yeah,
pictures?
everything's
Counter
functional.
and
What do you do?
everything.
Do you
So
cook in there?
beautiful.
Yeah, you cook in there, entertain in there.
What's the story with the gas pump? That's a
Okay, well, you're a prosecutorial person. You ask all the right questions. That gas pump, when I grew up in Wearsdale, right on the corner, what they call Cope's Corner in Sunset Harbor, the Redding family lived there in a big old two-story house, and they had two pumps right when you pulled into their driveway. It was their columns that you drove through.
Oh, wow.
Identical pumps.
oh my gosh.
And Eleanor Redding, who just died at 94 about a month ago, went to see her and her son, who I've known my entire life. And I told them what I was doing, and they agreed to sell me the two pumps. So there was obviously they had rust. So we took two pumps and made one. And
okay.
that pump was made between 1923 and 1926. And it's called a Mae West pump. That was because Mae West was big at the top, skinny, and then big at the bottom. and that was the term for that company that made those pumps.
Oh wow! Wow. So how? This is probably not. I'm sure it doesn't work, right? I mean, there's no gas coming.
No, but it's fully functional, and it's so amazing. You look at it, American technology. Here we are talking about is we're just the best. If you take those that pump was made in 23, and really, gas, oil, kerosene pumps were about the turn of the century. About the same time cars came in, but they had other uses. That thing works by gravity and no electricity. So what it is,
Wow.
there would be a pump, there'd be a tank in the bottom.
There's a gadget for you, Jim.
And it takes a handle, and you take the big handle back and forth.
Oh, wow.
Then that pumps gas up to that big glass cylinder, and it's got markings on it from 1 gallon to 10 gallons. So if somebody wanted to buy 5 gallons of gas, you pump the handle back and forth till you put 5 gallons of gas in it.
Oh, wow.
And then you would squeeze the handle, and all of it would gravity run out. But what's so important about that, if you think about it, is that one feature probably was one of the top 5 things that created farming in America, because now you could put gasoline, diesel, kerosene in the middle of nowhere to run tractors to do farm work.
Wow, you're
because
right.
they
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
take
See,
electricity.
we don't realize sometimes
Wow.
when people say, what is the greatest invention ever made? We forget things like that.
Absolutely.
Because if it hadn't been for that, as you say, we wouldn't have the agricultural.
Well, no, and water. So you got to have gasoline to run machinery. You have to also have water, A, to subside on, B, to irrigate, and C, to feed animals. Well, they figured out how to make a windmill many, many years ago.
It's amazing,
and
yeah.
that doesn't run on electricity. So you could put a windmill anywhere and thus pull water out of the ground. I mean, it's just...
It's true that when you think about what America had when we first started settling this land, we didn't have a whole lot.
Nope.
So we had to come up with ingenious ways of solving some of the problems. So how long did it take to build the gas station?
Well, I started in January of 2013.
You did it yourself?
No. I want to put a plug in for Dennis Ehman, Ehmann. He's a young, in his 40s, a contractor here. And Dennis not only helped me design it, but he did most of the work, including all the finish work himself.
Oh, my.
And he's now, after the recession's over, he's gone back to custom home building, but he was doing, obviously, like every other builder was at the time, was doing renovations and odd things. And I had him at a perfect time, so he built that gas station in 9 months.
Wow.
And one other thing I think that's important, at that time, they were tearing down the Southern Plate Glass building. Okay, down on was that Magnolia?
Magnolia.
Yeah. And the Costello family I'm friends with, and the building was completely razed. So I bought the rights to take anything out of there architecturally. So when you go to my gas station, you walk through the door that was on Southern Plate Glass.
Oh,
Really?
And we kept all the stickers on it. It says Southern Plate Glass.
Oh, that is awesome.
And since 1923, so I had it reframed. It hangs perfect, and you walk through that door, and any of the tin we used inside came off of that building. So, like I was telling you, I look at buildings like people, and it's almost like what do you call that? An organ donation.
Right.
Southern Plate Glass did an organ donation, and it's now been recreated as the gas station in my backyard. And I'm very proud of saving pieces of Marion County.
That had to have been the hit of the Hops tour.
There was Pam Stafford said, even the women liked the gas station.
I bet.
Well, there's I think the same reason people like old cars is because there's a sense of looking back, and there's some kind of maybe an emotional attachment to things from the past, right?
Yes.
Do you know what I want to ask you as a car guy? Whatever happened to the hood ornament? How come that went away?
Well, they really didn't, if you think about it. Well, okay, you'd have to say how long, but if you think about it, hood ornaments were still in vogue in the late 60s, mid-60s, definitely the mid-60s. Think about an Oldsmobile Rocket 88, and it still had the rocket on the front of the hood.
Does it really?
Sure. So, one reason was that hoods changed design, and no longer did you need to get to the radiator because they became closed radiator systems.
Oh, was the ornament a functional thing?
There's a handle.
Well,
worked
yes,
as a handle.
it could be a handle, but they started with what was called the motometer. Motometer, and that was a thermostat, not a thermostat, a temperature gauge, and it had mercury in it, and it looked like a lollipop screwed into the top of the radiator cap. Those started in the teens, and were very much in vogue till the late mid-30s. And you could be in your car and it had a thermometer on it. And you could look exactly driving and see the temperature of your car.
And you had that sporty car in the picture. I mean, every woman would love to be a passenger in that car.
Well,
with that long scarf.
Well, he's
and
hoping
everything.
so.
Absolutely. Well, there's two parts to that car. I'm friends with Randy Ema, who is Jay Leno's restorer, and Randy called me one day 15 years ago, 12, and he said, I got this tired old race car that a friend of mine wants to sell, and are you interested? And I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. And sent me pictures, and it turned out that car was owned by a man named Jim Talmadge. And I've learned so much about it. If you go back to the turn of the century, really the most, I don't want to say the very most famous, but right up there at the top 5 most famous movie stars was the Talmadge sisters, Talmadge.
Really?
In the silent 20s, they were silent stars. They were at the top of the earnings.
I like Silent Woman.
Yeah, I bet you do.
No, silent movies. They're actually talking, but you can't hear them. Is that the same thing?
That's it. I tuned them out.
I have a large listening audience and following for women, so I deny any understanding or agreement with those remarks.
Email that. Yeah.
Yeah, email your concerns, too. So anyway, one of the Talmadge sisters married Buster Keaton, who was also one of the top film stars. And so they had 2 children. Well, Buster was running around on the Talmadge sister, so she divorced him in the early 30s and took the 2 kids, and she changed their name from Keaton to Talmadge.
Oh.
So he grew up working for MGM, was involved with MGM in the World War II. I think that the Talmadge sister that had married Buster that divorced her married Mr. Selznick next, and he owned MGM.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
The big cheese.
Oh.
Remember, if you
David.
see Gone with the Wind, you always see, is it
David
Leonard
O.
Selznick?
Selznick.
Yeah.
Selznick? So she understood economics. Okay? So Jim goes through World War II. He was involved with MGM. In 1970, he's in whatever reason in Indianapolis, and he finds the body of my car in a shed next to the Indianapolis Speedway.
Oh, wow.
And it's a real 1931 IndyCar body. And MGM wanted him to buy it to use it as a prop, but he understood the value of it, so he kept it. And he built with period parts, and he was rich. He had his own machine shop, and so he assembled my car in 1970.
Oh.
And it's built in 1970, but it's all built with 1931 parts.
Wow.
Nice.
I wonder
That
if
is
any of
great.
that could be like extracted from like Cuba, because they say Cuba's like loaded with all these old cars.
Well, they are, but they are so slap worn out. You'd have to rebuild them from scratch, and you'd think of the what do you call it, the salt air has got to
Oh, really?
wreak
Right.
havoc on
Yeah.
the bodies. But you're going to see some of those cars get out of Cuba sooner or later, and as a curiosity, they'll be restored, or maybe not restored. Maybe they'll be just as a static display
Yep.
of
Yeah, yeah.
talking about static displays, the people that owned Southern Plate Glass, the Costellos, were kind enough to sell me the 2 big neon signs that hung in front of them. And I have them in storage.
Oh, wow.
And I've offered them to the mayor. And there's only 2 minor stipulations. One is they need to be displayed inside, and B, that they need to make them work again. But I can help with that because they can't be outside anymore. But they're an integral part of Ocala history, and they're safe. I've got them in a storage building, and but one of them's 14 feet tall, or 11 or 14, and it just takes a big roof.
Yeah.
Put that in.
to really
Isn't
handle that.
it?
But one day they'll reappear.
It doesn't it make you feel good that Ocala is being kind of revitalized? The historic district was, improved so much. The square has improved so much, and
Yep.
I just think whoever's responsible for that, we should thank them.
Well, I can tell you exactly who it is, and that's my aunt, Shirley Lovell, and her husband, Armin Lovell, and Mr. and Mrs. Jaycox. And the 4 of them started HOPS, which stands for the Historical Ocala Preservation Society. And they went to city council, and city council was all scared of them, so they did what city council did with Aunt Shirley
That's right.
and we're told to do, and they created the historic district to protect those buildings and made it harder just to summarily tear them down. And also, as much as not summarily tear them down, but just make an awareness and an appreciation and awakeness at what the great things that we have here. Thanks to the Jay Coxes and the Lovels, Ocala looks like Ocala does.
It looks beautiful.
It
does.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
The only thing, I don't know if it would have been a good thing or not if they had kept the courthouse. When you see pictures of that old courthouse, and then you see the one in Citrus County, and you say, wow, didn't we have something like that?
Yeah, just like
beautiful.
it.
Yeah.
Well, urban renewal, under the name of urban renewal, was the cancer that destroyed untold historical buildings across America, and we have that to blame.
And we have you to thank for preserving a lot of it. So,
well, thank you.
That was such a fun conversation.
All right. So why don't we have George on again and talk about the subject that he was going to bring up this morning?
Oh, did we not talk about what you wanted?
Well, no. I want to talk about, because, this is what Jim asked to talk about.
Right.
That the tax collector's office is a fascinating place for the movement of money.
I bet it is.
And
it's always my money going there.
it's everybody listening's money.
That's what you want to talk about?
The electronic movement of money. It's absolutely fascinating.
And I totally stole your theme. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, that's good. We want to bring him back, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd rather talk about Ma Barker and
oh man, I just thought that the house, the gas station was so interesting. Do you give tours of that? How does that work?
Well, we've got a big screen TV in there, so we watch the Gator games in there, and occasionally have a cocktail in there.
Oh, is that your man cave?
Yes, that's the man
boy! Oh my gosh, you got the best man cave ever.
Well, sure, it looks like a gas station on the outside. It's tucked away in the back, and it's its own speakeasy.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's the reason men have what I always say, tool sheds.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, women are equally invited to enjoy themselves there as well. We like everybody.
That's the politician.
That's right. We like everybody.
So we'll get George back, and we will discuss some of the things that he's interested in the sense of informing Ocala about how his office operates. You've streamlined that like there's nobody's business. I remember I had to go over here for this and over there for that. Everything is in one location.
First thing I said when I went after you were elected all those years ago, that you've streamlined it for sure.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming in and being a good friend to all of us, and for making us proud of Ocala.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, George Albright. All right. Jim, George, guys.
Till next week.
You guys are awesome. We'll put this up as a podcast. Share it with somebody. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Here is your 1-minute news brief. The Ocala Police Department is investigating a report of a card skimming device installed at the SunTrust Bank ATM at 3990 Southwest College Road. According to a news release, the device was used from about 11:49 a.m. until 2:17 p.m. on Sunday, March 4th. A man was arrested early yesterday after Ocala police say he hit a bicyclist and left him to die on the side of the road. A Florida high school student who was shot while defending his fellow classmates from gunfire during a mass shooting last month is now listed in critical condition. Recordings of 911 calls made during the shooting in Parkland have been released, illustrating panic and fear of parents and students. 2 people are in serious condition after being shot inside of a strip club on South Orange Blossom Trail in Orlando this morning. And a report from the Federal Trade Commission says Florida is one of the worst states for robocalls. The FTC says if a violating company loses a class action lawsuit, consumers may be entitled to $500 per call. And that is your news brief from The Source.